Okay, so now here we are live. Guys, for all those of you who do not know Kathy Parker, she is the school library media consultant for the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. Yes. And my friend, I ask you to not hold any of those things against her. It's amazing. Kathy, thank you so much for doing this for us tonight.
Great, and thank you. Thanks to Jennifer for inviting me to come and work with New Hanover County Schools today, and I really thank you all, the media coordinators who are there in person and those who will be watching this archived broadcast, for choosing to take the time to spend an hour of your lives together and with me thinking about the topic of collection management. And we're going to especially focus today on collection management in light of the digital transition and the implications that are there for school library media coordinators given the digital transition. So that's what we're going to be spending the next hour of our lives on. And I hope that after the end of the hour you will find that it benefits your practice and that it was worth the hour that you spent. That being said, Jennifer, will you be my timekeeper and just give me a shout out when it's like 10 till 5?
I absolutely will.
That way I can make sure that we end on time and that I stay on task.
Okay. I'm going to mute my microphone on this end because people will be coming in and out. That way you don't get a lot of feedback. But if you tell a joke, it's not that we're not laughing. I'm sure that you're very funny. You're just muted, okay?
I'm going to imagine you all just rolling with laughter.
It'll be the reality. So, okay?
Okay.
All right.
And while you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen too.
That sounds good.
I also hope after this session that you'll apply some of the knowledge that you learned from our talk today and from the contributions that your colleagues are going to make to your practice and collection management. Right now what you should be seeing is my screen, which is the Library Media wiki link that we will be using today, and this is where you will need to be for those of you present on your computers. So if you will go to that shortened URL, that'll get you to this screen that I'm sharing with you. Can everyone see that?
I'll read it to them and I'll let you know when we're all logged in, Kathy.
Oh, okay. And Jennifer, is what I'm showing you being projected? Like, do you all have a data projector there?
Yes, we do.
Oh, okay. So
that's all.
Got you. Okay.
So let me get them online, and then I'll let you know we're up and ready.
Okay. I'll just stand by then. Thank you.
Okay, Kathy, I think we're all set, okay?
Okay.
I think we're all set. Let's go ahead, and you can go ahead and get started. There are a couple of folks coming in. I'll get them going, okay?
Okay, that's fine. So you can see me scrolling through the wiki?
Yes.
Okay, great. So for those of you who have been in any of my professional development sessions or who have read any of my posts in our school library media coordinator and instructional technology facilitator Edmodo group, know that I view most everything in the library media world through the lens of our North Carolina School Library Media Coordinator professional standards. And we're going to do that today as well in thinking about collection management. We're going to view collection management through the lens of our professional standards as we consider aspects of collection management like selection policy, data-driven decision-making, our material selection, and especially the digital transition. And I wanted to show you a couple of things on this wiki that you will need for today, and hopefully that you'll want to come back to for the future. So on the wiki, you'll notice that my presentation slides are here, so you're welcome to download those. If you want to have them up on your computer while I'm going through them, that's fine. Or for those of you all who are physically present today, you know, it's being projected, so you'll be able to see them there as well. But if you want to take a look at the presentation in the future, it's right there for you. Something that we are going to be using today to note our thoughts, to share our experience and our knowledge with each other today on collection management is this Google Doc. So I would like for you all to go ahead, those of you who are physically there, go ahead and open this Google Doc. If you need to open it in another window or another tab so that you'll have it open, because at different times today we're going to stop and give you a moment to contribute to the conversation on collection management. There are also on this wiki resources for another day, like if there are specific areas that you need more support in. We obviously can't cover all of this in an hour. So I wanted to post some resources here that you can come back to another day and maybe focus on personalizing an area where you really need support. So if so, then you can take a look at these resources at another time. I know you're not on your device right now, but just note this URL that got you to the wiki. And when you get your device, bookmark it, because these resources will stay here for the duration, and you'll be able to come back to them as needed. Okay, so we should have our Google Doc open and ready, and now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to switch screens and share my slides with you. So give me just a minute to do that. Okay, so can you see the presentation slides now?
Yes.
Great. So the digital transition that we are experiencing right now in the world, not just the library media world, but it really requires us to kind of expand our understanding, our concept of collection management. But the foundational principles of collection management haven't really changed. So where do we start? Jennifer Lagarde can tell you, for better or worse from working with me at DPI, that I am a meticulous planner. I'm very methodical and really intentional, and usually I spend twice the amount of time planning that I do implementing. So, of course, my first recommendation is going to be to start with a plan when we think about collection development. Now, our plan that we have for collection management should be thoughtful and intentional, and it really should reflect our vision and our mission for our library. So the first thing that I want you to contribute to our Google Doc is I want you to turn to the Google Doc, and without looking up your school website, without going to your library media webpage, it doesn't have to be verbatim, word for word, you can just give us the gist of it. I want you to put your library's mission. So just on the Google Doc, in the first column that says mission, I want you to take a moment and just write for us the mission for your library. Preparing students for the 21st century. Helping students, supporting. I see. Great.
Hey, Kathy.
Yes.
We had a couple more people show up than
Okay.
planned. Can you add a couple rows at the bottom?
Sure.
Thank you.
That gives some extra rows for you all. Whoops, I'm putting some of the extra rows in the middle, not at the bottom. Somehow I got up there, but you all can fill those in as well. Great, and what I will say for those of you who are watching this archive broadcast is that one of the first things that you can do to apply this professional development to your practice is if you don't have a library mission statement, definitely start by creating one, because as you can see from the Google Doc, your colleagues have their mission statements for their library here, and we definitely should have those mission statements to guide our collection management plan, as well as a variety of aspects of our library media program. So thank you all for sharing your missions there for your library, and we should keep those missions in mind and connect them with our collection management plan. So another thing that we need to think about with our collection management plan as we're planning developing our collection is to connect it not only to our mission but to our school goals. So now what I'd like for you to do is in that same Google Doc, you'll see the next column is your school goals. So I want you to do the same thing. I want you to just think about your school improvement goals, and I want you to post one of the goals that your school has for your students. Because as we are developing our collection and thinking about collection management, we need to connect our plan and our actions in implementing that plan to our school goals. So we have to know those goals. So right now, just take a minute and key in one of your school goals. While you all are doing that, I'm going to insert a few more rows in case we need them.
Kathy, I want to ask a clarifying question real fast.
Sure, go right ahead.
Google Doc, this next column that they're entering a school-wide goal, right?
Right, one of their
school goal.
Right, like from their school improvement plan. What's one of their school improvement goals?
Okay, all right. We just wanted to make sure we were on the right page, okay?
You are.
Okay, give us another minute.
Sure. I'm seeing preparing students to become lifelong learners, improving reading scores among third graders. Improving student reading achievement, great. What I really am happy to see here is so many of you immediately knowing what those school improvement goals are and keying them in. Because, again, our collection management plan should be tied to our school improvement goals. And if we don't immediately know what those goals are, then we need to learn them. Okay, so that's something else that we can do to implement this professional development back in our practice. If you're not that familiar with your school improvement goals, obviously many of you are because you're inputting them right in this Google Doc. But if you're not, then that's a first step. That is a first step in collection management. Know your mission, your vision for your library, know your school improvement goals, and connect your collection management to that mission and to those school goals. Something else that you need to think about with your collection management plan is relevance to your patrons' interests and needs. That's critical, especially when considering the digital transition that we're in, because incorporating digital resources and devices really requires us to ask questions like, why do my students need these resources? How will my students use them? How will students have access at school and at home? Will they work for my students with disabilities? Can they improve the learning of my students with disabilities? What learning styles and skills do my students have to effectively use these? What's my district's policy? It's very important to know what your district's policy is regarding digital resources and devices. And we'll talk more about this in a minute when we talk about needs assessment, but the takeaway is really that if we don't strategically plan, then we'll jump on the next greatest gadget bandwagon, which could waste money without meeting your students and your teachers' needs, and can actually set your library media program back by damaging your program's credibility in the eyes of your stakeholders. So thinking about relevance to patrons' interests and needs, thinking about aligning to the curriculum, having a plan that's data-driven, and also meeting our professional standards through our collection management plan. So those are the things that I recommend that we start with when we are thinking about our collection and developing it. And that'll take us to needs assessment. For effective planning, I mentioned the importance of knowing your users, both your teachers and your students. So I wanted to kind of touch on assessing their needs. I've listed some essential questions here on this slide to consider, but I also want you to share how you get this information from your users. So I want you to take a minute and just look over these questions and then post some of the methods that you use to assess needs at your school, because oftentimes we get the best ideas from our colleagues. So what I want you to do is same thing in the Google Doc. I want you to post now, after you've looked at these questions, how do you get this information from your teachers, from your students, so that you can assess what their needs are. Take a minute and share with your colleagues the different methods that you use to gather this information. Surveys, I see. Working with the instructional coach, that's good collaboration. Surveying teachers, suggestion box. Developing relationships with teachers and students. That relationship building is definitely key in learning what their needs are. Using test data. Great. And something to think about, too, with needs assessment is that equitable access is probably a lot more prominent, is a more prominent issue with the digital transition, because with print resources, students can check the items out and take them home, and they can do that with digital resources as well, but you have to consider things like, are the resources on a device that has to be checked out? And if so, can the device be checked out? How are we going to manage those devices that are circulating? Do students have devices at home that have the system requirements that are necessary to access digital formats? Do they have Wi-Fi at home, which may be necessary? So if not, if they don't have that, then how will equity challenges be overcome in your schools with your students? So when we're thinking about needs assessment and curricular needs and professional needs, we also need to think about, for the digital transition, what technology do they have access to at school or at home for those digital resources that we are going to be including more and more of in our collections. All right, thank you all for putting those ideas down about ways that you assess needs. Hopefully this will give some of your colleagues ideas of things that they can do in addition to what they're doing already to learn more about what their teachers and their students need. And that way it'll help us with our collection development. And that kind of goes right along with data-driven decision-making and planning. So as we are creating our collection plans, as we are assessing our needs, our students' needs, our teachers' needs, we're getting that data and we're using that data to help us make decisions about our collections. We can see, looking at, remember I said looking through the lens of our professional standards, you've probably noticed that I have a relevant professional standard on each, or excuse me, one of the performance indicators for a professional standard on all of these slides. And just looking at data-driven decision making and planning, I see that the proficient performance indicator for our professional standard 3 is that our collection management decisions should be informed by data. So doing these things helps us to meet those performance indicators for our evaluation instrument based on our professional standards. So if we're looking at data-driven decision-making, then we're looking at our collections. Something to consider with digital resources is with the print resources that we have, you can do like a collection analysis and you can find gaps in your collection, age titles, non-circulating titles, those kinds of things. With digital resources, depending on what systems you go with, what formats you go with, you need to think about, am I going to be able to get the same data about those resources? When I run a collection analysis, will it include my ebooks? If not, is there a way to? If so, how? Am I going to be able to keep up with the circulating titles, or am I only going to be able to keep up with the circulating devices, or can I keep up with both? So those are things that we need to think about when we're adding digital resources to our collections. That kind of goes into getting the data and collection analysis, not just with our print resources, but also with the digital resources that we're using. And of course, gathering patron data, and these are all ways to gather patron data that you all mentioned on the Google Doc. Virtual suggestion boxes, benchmark testing, and I'll mention here that there's a link on this presentation to the School Library Media Coordinator role and permission recommendations from the Department of Public Instruction for the roles and permissions that you as a Library Media Coordinator should have in SchoolNet to give you access to aggregate level data. So if you want to double check with your data manager or your principal, whoever is responsible at your school for your roles and permissions in SchoolNet, you can refer to this document and refer them to it to make sure that as the School Library Media Coordinator, you are in the system with the appropriate roles and permissions so that you can have access to some of that data, which you can then use to make decisions about your collection and the resources that you're adding to your collections. Collaboration is very important, and I was impressed to see that many of you on the Google Doc noted collaborating with teachers, building those relationships with students, with your instructional coach, because it improves your effectiveness, it promotes your program, it helps you to get buy-in, it supports advocacy, and it even can help you possibly to get funding by collaborating with others in the process. So collection management definitely should include a large component of collaboration, and I've just listed here some of the other parties that you should consider collaborating with. I would note that you need to make sure that in your collaborations, when you're thinking about managing your collection, that you know your district's policy on community relations. So I just put a link in the presentation there so that you can click on it and refer back to New Hanover County Schools' policy on community relations, because when you're going to be working with other organizations and collaborating with businesses, you definitely want to make sure that you're following your district's policy. Okay, so we should definitely collaborate to improve our effectiveness and to improve our collections. Oops, and somehow, let me get my cursor back. Here we go. So then selection. We have a plan, we've assessed our needs, we've collected data, we have collaborated with other parties, and now we are ready to select materials. The first thing I would definitely say about selection is don't wait to get funding before selecting materials. go ahead, always have an order on the tarmac waiting for takeoff, because you never know when that funding is going to come through and become available. And if your principal comes to you and says, I have X amount of dollars and it has to be spent, there's a deadline coming up, it has to be spent in a couple of days, then you want to be the one at the ready to use that money for improving your program. So one of the things to think about with selection is to know your district selection policy. And again, I've put a link there to what New Hanover County Schools has on their website. It may not be all that New Hanover County Schools has, but it's what I found that related to selecting instructional materials. So you definitely need to know it. You also, for those of you who are viewing this archive broadcast that maybe you're not from New Hanover County, you need to definitely know your district's policy and or create a selection policy if you don't have one. And even if your district has a selection policy, you may want to create something even more specific or in-depth as long as it follows and meets the parameters of your district's policy. But you might want to have your own specialized selection policy for your school. So that's a recommendation that I'd make. And I would start by looking at samples in Impact. So let's take a minute and go back to the Google Doc. And I want you all to help each other out again, give your colleagues some ideas of specific criteria that you use when you are thinking about resources to add to your collection. So in the Google Doc, you'll see the column for selection criteria. So for those of us who don't have selection policies and want to create our own, or who want to, tweak our own, what are some specific selection criteria that we should think about when we are managing our collections and thinking about additions for our collection? Go ahead and add those. Age appropriateness, I see that. Teacher requests, age. Student requests, high interest. Supporting the curriculum. Great. Replacement of worn out books. Definitely reviews. Consulting reviews is important. Something else to think about is with the digital transition is format. With the digital transition that's going on, is format something that we're thinking about with selection criteria. Definitely should be something that we think about. Price, quality, construction of an item, that's also can go into selection criteria. Aligning with the standards, you all already mentioned that, with your curriculum. Is there a gap in our collection? When we did a needs assessment, when we got data on our collection, did we notice that there's a gap where we're missing materials? So gaps in the collection could also be selection criteria. Great. Thank you all for adding that for your colleagues. So we're thinking about items that we want to select. We are consulting reviews so that we can make sure that we get high quality items for our teachers and our students. And then it's time to acquire those items. So we're going to definitely seek out funding and think about your school, your district, the PTSA. As you are seeking out funding, think about and see if you can express to these entities that you are trying to get funding from your connection with student achievement. What are these acquisitions going to do to help your students achieve? How are they connected to the standards? How are they connected to those school improvement goals? How are they connected to your library mission? And hopefully that will reinforce your need for funding as you are seeking funding from these different entities. Again, when you're seeking funding, make sure that you know your district's policy on community relations. Look at local business partnerships, partnerships with public libraries or academic libraries. In New Hanover County, you all have what? UNCW, you have Cape Fear Tech. I know that you all probably already have partnerships with your public libraries. So leverage those as you are seeking resources to include in your collection. And always be ready so that when that funding becomes available, you're ready to go ahead and acquire those resources for your collection. So then, after we've done some of these steps, we can weed, or we could weed before. You know, this might be something that you want to do after you've done a needs assessment. When you have analyzed your collection, you might immediately see that there are resources that are very aged and they are obsolete, or they are so old that they now have misinformation in them, and so we need to weed them. But definitely weeding is an important part of collection management. And something to think about with weeding is that it's really important to explain the need to weed to your stakeholders. As library media coordinators, we know why we need to weed, but a layperson doesn't understand about quality necessarily of the collection, and that an age title with misinformation definitely impairs the quality of the collection that we're providing for our students and for our teachers. So it's really important that as we are weeding, we're explaining to our stakeholders why we are weeding and the importance of that. Because we don't want, number one, we don't want our janitors to be dumpster diving trying to save books that they think were mistakenly thrown away. We also don't want community members to view this as being wasteful because they see that we are getting rid of or retiring books. We want them to be able to understand the purpose of having a quality collection for our students and our teachers, and that weeding is a fundamental part of that. You also need to make sure, again, that you know your district's policy and or procedures for what you do with the materials that you have weeded. Are you able to donate those? What are the parameters for discarding those? Some school systems collect them and keep them in a warehouse for years. Other school systems have policies where they are able to be given out to communities. So you just need to make sure you know what the policies and procedures are in place for your district for those materials that you have decided to retire. And again, for weeding, just like when you're selecting materials, we have to have criteria to help guide us. And that's something that will help us communicate to our stakeholders why we're weeding these resources, why we're getting rid of them. So now what I want you to do is go ahead and list what's the criteria that you use for weeding. You've got the criteria that you use for selecting. What do you do when you're weeding? How do you decide that it's time to retire a resource? We know that money is very tight. Every dollar needs to be spent wisely. We don't want to waste resources, but we know that there are some resources that are hurting our collection. So what do we need to think about when we are deselecting items for our collection? Age, condition of the book, dated information, misinformation. And thinking about misinformation, that kind of reinforces too knowing what makes me think about knowing what your district policy is or procedures for handling retired material. Because if it's got misinformation in it and we don't want it in our collection, do we want to be giving it to the community? Do we want to be giving it to students and teachers if it has misinformation in it? That's something to think about when we're thinking about what to do with those books after we have weeded them. Lack of circulation. Right, having a book on the shelf if it hasn't been circulated in 10 years, all it's doing is collecting dust. If it's plain, if it's worn out, what kind of interest is it going to attract for students if the cover is torn up, if it is worn out? Those are all definitely good things to think about when we're thinking about weeding. Relevance. It could be that you have materials in your library for courses that no longer exist. So those materials no longer align to your curriculum. Are they being circulated? If not, why are we keeping those? Those are things to think about when we're weeding. And weeding is definitely an important step in our collection management process. All right, great. Thank you all for sharing that information of what you all think about when you're trying to decide what to deselect in your collections. We also need to make sure that we're sharing this. I've mentioned it several times. I've mentioned the importance of, and you all have also mentioned in the Google Doc, the importance of collaborating with others in your schools and communicating, sharing why you are weeding, getting input from needs assessment. But sharing and communicating is definitely an important part of the collection management process. We can use our experience and our expertise. One of the ways we can share is to lead staff development related to collection management. You all have media meetings for New Hanover County Schools. Have you considered at one of those media meetings leading something with your colleagues that has your experiential knowledge? What do you do? What are your best practices? What have you learned about collection management? Share that with colleagues. Share it with colleagues outside of the district. ECU's Librarian to Librarian Networking Summit is taking submissions right now and proposals. Have you thought about proposing a collection management, collection development session at the Librarian to Librarian Networking Conference? That's something to think about. Use your experience, use your knowledge to help your colleagues in your schools, in your districts, and across the state. Teach the selection process to others, and not just your colleagues, but think about teaching the selection process to your teachers. If you teach them the selection process that you use when you are evaluating resources, some of the selection criteria that you noted here in this Google document, think about how teaching that to your teachers can help them when they are trying to select materials for their own classrooms. Think about sharing your selection process with your parents and how sharing this information can help your parents when they are trying to select something like appropriate apps for their kids. So teach the selection process to others, lead staff development on your process, celebrate success. We definitely want to celebrate our successes, especially when we can connect those successes and connect our collection to student achievement. We want to make sure that we communicate those connections, because communicating those connections will give us more buy-in, will give us more support. It advocates for our program, so we want to share those successes and communicate those connections with our stakeholders. All right, so now let's look at some more digital collection considerations. We've talked a little bit about things to think about with access, but now let's look at some other considerations for collection management that are specific to this digital transition that we're in. And this is actually a picture of Sarah Justice's Kindle Cafe that I thought was really interesting when I did a site visit there. She has basically converted their magazine subscriptions to a digital collection that are housed on these Kindles in her library. So a thought for me to share with you all about digital collections is that it is better right now to be blended. Just take a minute and take a look at that quote. I think it's a great quote that we should think about when we are deciding what is best for our students as far as resources, whether we should go with print resources, whether we should go with digital resources. Our libraries have to meet the needs of diverse users. So our instruction should differentiate, and so should our collection. It should not have to be an either-or proposition when we are thinking about a library collection, because we have so many different patrons that we have to serve and needs that we have to meet there. So there are conflicting studies about reading comprehension from paper text versus digital text. We know that digital reading requires different skills than traditional reading. Some students are overwhelmed. They're easily distracted by online information, and so those students may prefer to use a traditional paper source, and we need to have it if that's what's necessary to meet their needs. Some students have their own devices, and so they want ebooks, while others still want to read, especially fiction, from a paper book. Some want their nonfiction digital, but they want their teen romance to be paperback. So again, it's crucial. That's why we have to have the needs assessment, because it's crucial to know our users, to know our students, and to develop our collection, especially when we're thinking about digital resources versus print resources, to develop a collection that really keeps their needs in mind. So things to consider. We've touched on delivery method and equitability, access, and with access you also have to consider licenses. With digital resources, some digital resources have single access licenses while others have multiple access licenses. With access, you also have to think about if you're going to circulate the ebooks for access or if you're going to circulate the devices to give students the access. You need to consider the Americans with Disability Act compliance for devices that you may choose to use. Will the device be usable for those who are sight and hearing impaired? The issue of ownership is also something that is kind of new in this digital transition. With paper books, your library clearly owns the physical copy, but with digital titles, they may be owned by the vendor, and maybe you subscribe for access. Or the number of checkouts may be limited, or you may own the digital copy outright. Another hot topic in thinking about digital resources right now especially is digital curation. Our collections are no longer limited to what's housed between the four walls of our facilities. There may be free online resources that I've curated and added, and I mean literally added to my catalog using something like Web to Mark, which enables me to turn MARC records into, to turn websites into MARC records, make MARC records for websites, and actually have those in my catalog, my online catalog. Maybe I have a YouTube channel of educational videos that I've collected from my teachers and students. Are they a part of my collection? Yes. Do I own them? No. But I've made them accessible to my teachers and students. So when we're thinking about our digital collections, we can't just think about digital resources that we own. With digital curation, we can give our teachers and our students access to lots of valid, legitimate educational resources that we don't own. So there's that ownership piece that we really have to think about and expand. It really expands our concept or our notion about what is our collection. Our collection's no longer within the four walls of our library. So our digital transition really creates a lot of challenges to collection management, but it also has the potential to help us develop dynamic collections with access to resources that we didn't have before for our students and for our teachers. But there's definitely a lot that we have to consider with this digital transition. And I think a lot of people on the street don't realize that there are so many considerations that we have to make when we are thinking from a school library perspective about incorporating digital resources in our collection, because most of the lay people or people on the street are used to their own personal devices, and they have their books on their device, and it's very easy for them to access it. But when you think about applying that to a school library and equitable access and devices and compatibility, that really poses a lot of challenges that we really need to think about so that we are able to overcome those challenges and provide the best resources that we can in our collections for our students and for our teachers. So with that being said, I am going to stop sharing my screen right now. Give me a moment. And I want to give you all an opportunity to ask me some questions that you all may have about collection management, because I have been talking and I'm sure you're probably tired of hearing my voice. So let me give my voice just a rest for a minute, and then you can ask me questions.
Do y'all have any questions for Kathy? Now's a good time to get some of the DPI responses to questions we might have about things.
I would just like to make sure that they don't lose sight of the students who do not have access to internet at home, whether it's textbook or library resources.
All right, so Kathy, are you hearing this?
Yes, I'm hearing it. Access is definitely something that we have to be considering with our libraries and these resources. That, you know, we don't want to choose resources that our students won't be able to access at home. So I definitely hear that concern.
Kirby, when you said that, you said you want to make sure they don't lose sight of. Who's they in that sentence?
Whoever is making decisions about the digital realm and,
yes,
and how far it goes and what becomes obsolete. And
Kathy,
I've actually had a teacher that said to me within the last month, do you think that print resources will ever become a thing past? Because she says if that happens, I will leave teaching.
Well, I want to make sure, Kathy, you correct me if I'm wrong, but the they in that sentence, we're talking about our state legislature and our state school board, correct?
That's what it sounds like to me. It sounds like that's what she's talking about, they being the decision makers, the legislators, school boards. So one of the things that really brings up is advocacy. Right? Because definitely at DPI, we can, through our relationships, building our relationships, we definitely share what we consider to be best practices. But school library media coordinators, community members can also make sure that they advocate with their legislators, with their school board members, with those decision makers above them for best practices as well, through NCS LMA. Through organizations like that as well.
Ask her if that's why that bill was written so ambiguously, so that each LEA could interpret it as they so chose to fund it.
Okay, did you hear that question, Kathy?
I did. I don't know, was it that a question or a statement? It sounded like
her question was, is that the reason House Bill 44 was written ambiguously to just say instructional materials so that school districts could interpret it the way they saw best for their students?
Well, I can't speak to the intention behind it, whether it was intentionally vague or not, so I can't answer that question. But what I can say is that definitely for the state level really acknowledges site-based decision-making. I know that from library media and dealing with issues with library media policies and LEAs. There is definitely the understanding of site-based decision-making. Now, how that relates to that particular House bill, I can't speak to that.
Okay.
Because I was not a part of that decision-making. Does that make sense?
But back to the advocacy then, if you feel that the bill is ambiguous and if you want to ensure that your stakeholders have equitable access, would it not behoove the media specialists of that LEA to maybe possibly push for more clarification at their school board so that it is clearly understood what will and will not be funded?
I would definitely support advocacy. Whatever is necessary in your LEA, whether it's New Hanover County Schools or whether it's somebody else out there who is watching this archive broadcast. It's part of North Carolina professional standards for library media coordinators to advocate for best practices for your program. That's part of our professional standards. That's part of our evaluation instrument. So I definitely recommend advocating, whether it's related to collection management and digital resources or other issues for your library, advocating through your media supervisor, media director, whatever you have in place there, through your principal, through your PTSA, through your school board, whoever the important stakeholders are that influence your library media program and are making those important decisions that are going to impact your library media program and its ability to meet your stakeholders, your students' needs. Those are definitely entities that you should be advocating for your program. Does that make sense?
That's why I appreciate you trying to bring back the line item budget for media.
Mm-hmm. We're trying, or at least recommendations.
Right.
I don't think we'll ever get a line item back. I don't say ever. I don't think that's in the near future, but I think we can get recommendations. We can get here's recommended spending. You know what I mean? I think we can get that.
Or a percentage of the given school's
Yeah, I think we can get recommendations. Yeah. I don't think we're going to ever get a line item, but Kathy, I'm sorry we got off on a tangent there, but
no, that's fine. Go ahead and handle whatever business you need to handle.
When you were talking about advocacy, and Barbara was talking too about the local areas advocating for what's appropriate for our LEAs, would you also say that there should be, or there could be, some variation within the district itself that what might work at one school may not necessarily be right for every school in the district? Well, I'm looking at our district right now, and I'm thinking there's a big difference between the population at Rachel Freeman versus Wrightsville Beach over here. So what may work at one school may not work at every school.
Well, and that kind of goes back to my reference to site-based decision-making and the viewpoint, understanding at the state level about site-based decision-making, that definitely there's a lot of local control, a lot of local decision-making done through your local school board and your district, but then there is site-based decision-making for different schools, like, and it's pretty much necessary because, just like you mentioned, Jennifer's students and their needs are not necessarily going to be the same as the needs of Joanne's students at her school. I mean, you have schools that are rural, and you have schools that are urban, and you have schools that have a mix. And if our collections and our programs are meeting the needs of our users, then your needs, your program's needs, may be different from Joanne's, or different from, schools in other districts. So I think that's definitely something to consider. When you are making decisions about library media policy that relates to digital resources, you definitely have to think about the sites and the unique characteristics of the students and the teachers at each site.
Yep, we got another question.
Does she have schools that she would recommend that have already developed I know that most people have a collection development plan, but they have incorporated the new digital shift?
That's a great question.
Go about selecting digital materials, or even reading, possibly?
Sure.
I mean, have they already written that into their plan? Have you got any schools that you would recommend as a good place to go look at that?
Sure.
The digital aspect of their collection.
I could barely hear that. I heard bits and pieces. It sounds like she was looking for maybe schools to recommend who are already doing some of these things with collection management. Is that what she said?
You know of any exemplar collection development plans that include digital resources and policies related to digital resources?
Definitely. I have some of those plans that I can share with you all. Plus, what I do is go back to the Division of Digital Teaching and Learning, to the DTL consultants for the regions, and ask them as well for exemplar programs, and then I can get back to you on that. Would the best way for me to do that be to send you that information in an email, and then you can disseminate it? Could you maybe add them to your wiki? And then since everybody has that list, then as you add them, they could just go to that wiki page? Sure, sure. How about if I put some on the wiki page down under, I'll just do like under that resource section, I'll do like an additional like additional resources on that page.
Okay, that sounds good. Everybody's nodding, so that way they can just go ahead and go to that same link that they already have.
Right, and I'll touch base with some who have already shared their plans with me and make sure that they're fine with me sharing that out, and then I'll post it on that wiki.
Great. Any other questions for Kathy, y'all? Okay, Kathy, I want to say thank you on behalf of all of us. I really appreciate your time and information that you shared tonight. It gave us a lot to think about.
Great. And can I just ask one thing of you all? I know you all have had a really long day, but I like to make decisions driven by data as well. And I would love to get your feedback on this session so that I can use it to improve professional development that I offer in the future. So what I'd love for you to do is to give me feedback. And I have a feedback form. What I'm going to do, I thought it was a link on this wiki, but it doesn't look like it is. So what I'm going to do is down at the bottom in that additional resources section, I'm going to post a link to that form. And maybe sometime in the next day or so, you all can just kind of revisit this and just take about 2 minutes and give me some feedback as well.
I'll send out a reminder. I'll send out a reminder tomorrow, y'all. So if you'll add that sometime tonight, I'll remind them in an email tomorrow, Kathy.
I will. I'll add that as soon as we get off here.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. Invite me back again, okay?
I sure will. Thank you. You have
all right, take care. Thank you all for all y'all do for our students.
Good night.
Good night.